Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the fascinating science of second language acquisition, or SLA for short. Imagine, if you will, that the language learning brain is this incredibly intricate, high-performance engine. To get it running smoothly, you can't just sit back and stare at it, right? You need the exact right kind of fuel, a perfectly timed spark, and a real understanding of how its internal gears work together. Throughout this explainer, we're going to look at the precise mechanics of how this language engine operates, pulling directly from decades of foundational linguistic research. So let's jump right in.
Let's be real for a second and think back to your high school language classes. You probably spent hours memorizing vocabulary lists, agonizing over verb conjugations, and yet somehow you could barely order a cup of coffee on vacation. So it begs the question, why do little kids learn languages effortlessly, while adults struggle for years? In linguistics, this is famously known as the age question. It is literally one of the most puzzling phenomena in the entire field. Children just seem to soak up language from the world around them with zero formal instruction, whereas adults, who have fully developed cognitive skills, just hit this massive wall. Why is that?
Well, this huge discrepancy brings us to a mind-bending mystery known as the poverty of the stimulus, or sometimes it's called Plato's problem. Here's the deal. Children are exposed to a really limited, completely messy subset of senses. I mean, parents make mistakes, people trail off with half-finished thoughts, yet these kids somehow magically induce the incredibly complex, infinite grammar of their native language. The evidence available to them is just way too meager to explain how fast they master it. This fascinating phenomenon strongly points to the idea that human beings are born with an extraordinary innate capacity. It's like we have this pre-installed mental software specifically designed to process linguistic information.
So, Section 1, Birth of a Discipline, Unlocking the Black Box. Let's see how scientists actually cracked open this cognitive engine to see what makes it tick.
It's crazy how rapidly our understanding shifted between 1954 and 1965. In '54, the term psycholinguistics gets thrown around for the first time. Then, bam, in 1957, Noam Chomsky publishes his groundbreaking book, Syntactical Structures, which completely shifted the focus away from old-school structuralist linguistics. By 1960, cognitive psychology is totally on the rise, pushing out pure behaviorism. This rapid decade of change established what we now call the cognitive revolution. It was this perfect moment when psychologists and linguists realized they absolutely had to work together. And because of this revolution, second language acquisition became its own dedicated scientific field.
Moving right along to Section 2, Inside the Engine, Internal versus External Factors. To really get this new science, we need a blueprint. So let's use Rod Ellis's framework to help us sort out the different components driving language development.
The crucial split here is between what happens inside the learner and what happens outside. On one hand, we have internal factors. Think of this as the brain's neurophysiological machinery, your cognitive processes, how your first language transfers over to your second, and those innate linguistic universals we talked about a minute ago. But an engine doesn't run on gears alone. It needs the environment. So on the other hand, we have the external factors, the social context you find yourself in, the input you receive, and the interaction you have with other people. These external factors are the absolute fuel and spark for your internal machinery.
Which brings us to arguably the most critical external factor of them all. Section 3, the power of input, fueling the mind.
Now, while all scientists totally agree that you literally cannot learn a language without being exposed to it, they definitely debate exactly how that fuel is processed. We've got 4 major SLA theories that map this out: Krashen's input hypothesis, Long's interaction hypothesis, Gass's input-interaction-output model, and Carroll's autonomous induction theory. Let's unpack these one by one to see how the engine actually uses its fuel.
Let's kick things off with Stephen Krashen's game-changing concept of comprehensible input. Krashen argued that for you to actually acquire a language, the input must be just slightly above your current level of competence. You need to be able to understand the core message, even if you have no idea what every single word means. But there's a huge catch here. Krashen noted that this fuel only makes it into your engine if your effective filter is low. Basically, you have to be in a relaxed, anxiety-free environment. If you're stressed out, that filter goes up and the language input just bounces right off you. This perfectly leads to Krashen's ultimate philosophy. He stated, and I quote, "Acquisition requires meaningful interaction in the target language, natural communication, in which speakers are concerned not with the form of their utterances, but with the messages they are conveying." Krashen truly believed that we acquire language subconsciously. We get it by grasping the meaning, not by forcing rote grammar rules into our heads or doing endless, rigid textbook drills.
But, of course, science loves a good debate. Academics like Barry McLaughlin push back pretty hard on Krashen's model. He pointed out that relying on comprehensible input all by itself doesn't always prevent a learner from fossilizing. Fossilizing is basically when you hit a massive wall and your language skills just totally stop improving. The big critique here is that just passively understanding a message might not provide enough mechanical force to build a fully fluent linguistic system.
So, if passive input isn't always enough, what exactly is missing? That brings us to Section 4, from input to output, the spark of interaction. If input is your raw fuel, interaction is the spark plug that actually causes combustion.
Enter Michael Long's interaction hypothesis. The absolute key phrase you need to remember here is negotiation for meaning. You know when you're talking to someone and you misunderstand them or they completely misunderstand you? You literally have to stop and negotiate. You ask for clarification, you repeat yourself, maybe you rephrase things. Long argues that this exact struggle to communicate forces your brain's selective attention to hyper-focus on the linguistic features you don't know yet. That struggle itself is what bridges the gap between the input you hear and your own spoken output.
So let's see how this builds into a complete mechanical journey. Susan Gass brilliantly mapped this out in 4 precise steps. Step 1 is the raw input. That's just your pure exposure to the language. Step 2 is apperception, or intake. This is the moment your brain actually notices specific data, very often thanks to that interactive spark we just talked about. Step 3 is integration. Here, your brain takes that newly noticed data and actively forms or restructures your internal grammar rules. And finally, step 4 is output, where you actually produce the language yourself. It's this highly structured, mechanical flow from raw data all the way to spoken fluency.
But what is going on at the absolute microscopic level during all of this? For that, we look at Suzanne Carroll's autonomous induction theory. She draws this totally fascinating line between input processing and parsing. Carroll is looking at the deeply unconscious micro-level processing of phonetic and grammatical stuff. While processing is simply taking the information in, parsing is your brain frantically attempting to structurally analyze and assign rules to the syllables and words it's hearing in real time.
And here is the most amazing scientific twist her theory introduces. Failure is actually a really good thing. Carroll points out that failures in parsing happen when the rules aren't easily available in the input. But our mental language engine actually learns best when it initially fails to parse a new rule. Think about it. When your brain's parser fails to make sense of a sentence using what it already knows, that failure acts like a blaring alarm bell, triggering the acquisition system to create brand new rules to solve the problem. So, a little bit of cognitive failure is literally what forces your brain's engine to upgrade itself.
Okay, let's tie all of this incredible science together. Input plus interaction equals forward motion. For sure, you absolutely need the raw comprehensible fuel of language input, and it has to be delivered in a low-anxiety environment. But you also desperately need the spark of meaningful interaction. You need the messy struggle of negotiating meaning, and you need those tiny microscopic moments of parsing failure to force your brain's internal machinery to adapt, integrate, and eventually produce fluent output.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Based on the hard science of input and interaction we just went through, how will you change the way you learn your next language? Are you going to stick to passive, boring vocabulary drills? Or are you going to seek out rich, comprehensible fuel and ignite it with real, messy, meaningful human interaction? The science shows us exactly how the engine works. Now it's entirely up to you to drive it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.